My name is Marcus Vane, and I've spent the better part of a decade cleaning up places people have forgotten. Most folks think industrial cleaning is all about power washers and bleach. But when you work for a firm like Restoration Solutions, the job is more about containment. We're the ones who go in after a factory leaks something caustic, or after a hospital shuts its doors and leaves the biohazards behind. It's a paycheck, and a good one, provided you don't mind the smell of rot or the way silence feels heavy in a place that used to be full of life. 2 weeks ago, I got the call for the Blackwood Land project. Blackwood was a regional theme park that had its heyday in the late 60s and early 70s before a series of unfortunate accidents, and a massive lawsuit shuttered the gates in 1978. It sat in a humid pocket of the Appalachian foothills, slowly being swallowed by kudzu and oak trees. My task was simple on paper: enter the park, assess the structural integrity of the main attractions, and clear out the high-priority debris before the demolition crews arrived. I met my supervisor, a man named Henderson, who looked like he'd been carved out of old leather and spite, at the rusted perimeter fence. He didn't offer a handshake. He just handed me a heavy ring of keys and a laminated sheet of paper. "The rules for Blackwood," Henderson said, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "Read them, memorize them. If you break one, don't bother calling the office. Just start running." I laughed, thinking it was just the usual veteran hazing. Henderson didn't crack a smile. He just pointed at the first rule on the list. "I'm serious, Marcus. This place, it didn't just close because of the money. It closed because it stopped being a park and started being something else. You stay in the light, you keep your radio on, and for the love of God, you pay attention to the stage." He left me there at the gate. I looked down at the sheet. It was titled Standard Operating Procedures, Blackwood Land Site Assessment. Rule number 1 was standard: always wear your respirator in enclosed structures. Rule number 2 was where it got weird. If the animatronics are in a different position than they were yesterday, do not turn your back to the stage. Rule number 3: if you hear the carousel music playing, do not investigate. It is a mechanical echo. Keep moving. I tucked the list into my pocket, grabbed my gear, and pushed through the gates. The park was a skeletal remains of joy. The Wonderway Main Street was lined with shops whose windows were shattered, the interiors filled with the gray dust of decayed stuffed animals and plastic souvenirs. I made my way toward the center of the park, where the Grand Pavilion stood. This was the heart of the park, a massive indoor theater that once housed the Barnyard Jubilee, an animatronic show that was the park's crowning jewel. The air inside the pavilion was thick and tasted of copper. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, hitting the velvet curtains of the main stage. They were tattered, hanging like strips of dead skin. I climbed onto the stage to check the floorboards. That's when I saw them. The Barnyard Jubilee. There was a pig in overalls playing a fiddle, a cow in a bonnet, and a massive 7-foot-tall rooster in a tuxedo standing center stage. Their fur was matted and falling off in clumps, revealing the rusted metal endoskeletons beneath. Their glass eyes reflected my flashlight, staring blankly into the empty theater. They were frozen in mid-performance, the rooster's beak cracked open in a silent song. I spent the day marking floorboards and checking the wiring. It was tedious work. I kept glancing at the rooster. It felt like it was leaning forward, just an inch further than it should be. I told myself it was the settling of the building, gravity doing its work on 40-year-old hydraulic fluid. Before I left for the night, I took a Polaroid of a habit I had picked up on other jobs to document progress. The flash popped, illuminating the grotesque faces of the Jubilee one last time. I walked out, locked the heavy chains on the pavilion doors, and headed to my trailer outside the fence. That night, the wind howled through the trees, sounding like distant screaming. I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about rule number 2. The next morning, the fog was so thick I could barely see the tops of the roller coasters. I unlocked the pavilion and stepped inside. The copper smell was stronger now. I walked up to the stage and pulled the Polaroid from my pocket to compare. My heart skipped a beat. In the photo, the pig with the fiddle was seated on a hay bale on the far left. The cow was on the right. The rooster was center. Now the pig was standing. Its wooden fiddle was tucked under its chin, but its head was turned 45 degrees toward the center of the stage. The cow had not moved much, but its bonnet was gone, lying on the floorboards. But the rooster was gone from the center. It was standing at the very edge of the stage, right where I had climbed up the day before. Its beak wasn't just open now. It was unhinged, hanging low against its chest. And its eyes, those glass, lifeless eyes, were looking directly at the spot where I was standing. I remembered the rule. Do not turn your back to the stage. I felt a cold sweat prickle my neck. I didn't turn around. I backed away one slow step at a time, keeping my flashlight fixed on the rooster's face. As I backed into the darkness of the theater seats, I heard a sound. A slow, rhythmic clank hiss. It was the sound of a hydraulic piston firing. I froze. The rooster didn't move, but the pig's fiddle arm jerked upward. The dry, rotted catgut strings of the fiddle snapped with a sound like a gunshot. I kept backing up, my boots treading on old popcorn buckets and broken glass. I didn't stop until my back hit the heavy metal exit doors. I reached behind me, fumbling for the handle, never taking my eyes off the stage. The rooster's head suddenly snapped upright. It didn't move smoothly. It moved in a series of violent mechanical twitches. Twitch, 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 until it was staring at me again. I shoved the door open and scrambled outside into the fog. I didn't stop running until I reached the gate. I sat in my truck, hands shaking, chest heaving. I pulled out the rules again. Rule number 4. If you see the rooster outside of the pavilion, the job is over. Leave your equipment. Do not go back for it. I looked toward the fog-shrouded entrance of the park. Something was moving in the mist, something tall, something that walked with a stiff, jerky. I spent the next 10 minutes sitting in the cab of my truck, the engine idling, my eyes glued to the rear-view mirror. The fog was a wall of shifting gray, swallowing the jagged silhouettes of the roller coaster tracks and the rotted spires of the fairy tale castle. Every time a branch swayed or a patch of mist swirled, my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I kept expecting to see that 7-foot-tall, tuxedoed rooster emerge from the tree line, its head twitching in that violent mechanical staccato. But nothing came. The park remained a graveyard of rusted steel and overgrown dreams. I looked down at the laminated rule sheet. My thumb was white-knuckled against the plastic. Rule number 4 said, if you see the rooster outside, the job is over. But had I really seen it? Or had I seen a shadow stretched thin by the morning light? If I walked away now, I'd lose the contract. Henderson would see to it that Restoration Solutions never hired me again. In this business, unreliable was a death sentence. I needed this payout. I had debts that didn't care about ghost stories or malfunctioning machinery. It's just hydraulics, I whispered to the empty cab. The valves are leaking. Gravity and pressure. That's all. I checked my gear. I had my heavy-duty flashlight, my radio, and a crowbar. I put the truck in gear, but I didn't drive away. Instead, I turned it around and backed it up against the perimeter gate, leaving the driver's side door unlocked. An escape route, just in case. I walked back toward the Grand Pavilion. The silence of the park was absolute. No birds chirped, No insects buzzed in the tall grass. It was as if the land itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. When I reached the heavy metal doors of the pavilion, I found them exactly as I had left them, propped slightly open from my frantic exit. I stepped inside. The copper smell was even more cloying now, mixed with the scent of old rancid grease. I kept my flashlight beam low at first, tracing the path to the stage. I didn't want to see the characters yet. I reached the edge of the seating area and finally raised the light. The stage was empty. The hay bales were there. The velvet curtains were there. But the barnyard jubilee, the pig, the cow, and the rooster were gone. The silence in the theaters suddenly felt deafening. I panned my light across the stage floor. There were deep, jagged gouges in the wood, as if heavy metal feet had been dragged across the surface. The gouges didn't lead toward the back of the stage or the wings. They led off the front, right toward the center aisle where I was standing. My radio crackled to life, the static loud enough to make me jump. "Marcus? You there? Report." Henderson's voice came through, distorted and thin. I fumbled for the radio on my belt. "Henderson, I've got a situation. The animatronics, they aren't on the stage. I think someone broke in and moved them." There was a long pause. When Henderson spoke again, his voice was lower, stripped of its usual bravado. "Marcus, listen to me very carefully. Are you still in the pavilion?" "Yeah, I'm in the center aisle." "Check rule number 5, Henderson said. "And Marcus, don't look up." The radio went down. I felt a drop of something cold and viscous hit the top of my head. It trickled down my forehead, stinging my eye. I wiped it away with my sleeve. It was dark, oily, and smelled like a machine shop. I ignored Henderson's warning. I had to. I tilted my flashlight upward. Above me, the pavilion's ceiling was a web of rusted steel rafters and old lighting rigs. Clinging to the beams, 40 feet above the floor, was the cow. It was hanging upside down, its hooves hooked over a crossbeam like some kind of grotesque, bloated bat. Its bonnet was gone, and its synthetic hide was torn open, revealing the complex clockwork and oily pistons inside. It wasn't moving, but its head was rotated 180 degrees, staring straight down at me. I backed away, my light swinging wildly. That's when I saw the pig. It was sitting in the third row of the theater seats, just 10 feet away. It was holding its fiddle, the bow positioned across the snapped strings. It wasn't looking at me. It was looking at the stage. I realized then that the rules weren't just warnings. They were a survival manual for a game I didn't know I was playing. I pulled the sheet out, my hands trembling so hard I could barely read the text. Rule number 5. If the pavilion is silent, they are hunting by sound. If you hear the fiddle, they are hunting by sight. If you hear the rooster crow, it is already too late. The theater was silent. I held my breath. I stayed perfectly still, my flashlight pointed at the floor to avoid drawing attention. My heart was thumping so loud I was sure the thing on the ceiling could hear it. I heard a soft clack, then another. From the darkness of the stage wings, the rooster emerged. It didn't walk like a machine. It moved with a fluid, predatory grace that defined its rusted frame. It stepped onto the stage, its tall, feathered body silhouetted against the faint light coming from the open doors behind me. It turned its head toward the pig in the audience, then toward the cow on the rafters. It was communicating. I began to move, inch by agonizing inch, toward the exit. Every time my boot crunched on a piece of debris, I froze. The rooster would tilt its head, its beak twitching, listening for the source of the noise. I was halfway to the door when the pig started to play. It wasn't music. It was a high-pitched screeching sound of metal scraping against metal, a discordant wail that echoed off the high ceiling. The pig was sawing the bow back and forth across the broken strings with frantic, violent energy. If you hear the fiddle, they are hunting by sight. The rooster's glass eyes suddenly ignited with a dim, flickering red light. It snapped its gaze directly onto me. The cow dropped from the rafters, landing on the theater seats with a bone-jarring thud that shattered the old wood. I didn't stay still anymore. I turned and bolted for the door. I burst out into the daylight, the fog still thick and clinging. I didn't head for my truck. My gut told me they expected that. Instead, I dove into the overgrown shrubbery of the Midway Maze, a hedge labyrinth that had become a tangled forest of thorns and ivy over the decades. I crashed through the briars, ignored the scratches on my face, and squeezed myself into a hollowed-out section beneath a collapsed wooden bridge. I killed my flashlight and curled into a ball, clutching my crowbar to my chest. Outside the maze, I heard them. Clank hiss. Clank hiss. The heavy, rhythmic footsteps of the rooster. It was patrolling the perimeter of the maze. Then came the sound of the pig's fiddle, muffled by the fog, a constant, irritating screech that seemed to be getting closer. I looked at the rules again, squinting in the dim light. Rule number 6. The characters cannot leave the park boundaries, but they own everything inside the fence. If you are trapped after sundown, find the security booth in the fun zone. It is the only place with a reinforced door. I checked my watch. It was 4:30 p.m. In late October, in the shadows of these mountains, the sun would be gone in less than an hour. The fog was already turning a bruised purple. I had to get to the fun zone. It was on the far side of the park, past the Cursed Canyon log flume and the astral spinner. I waited until the sound of the footsteps faded toward the pavilion. I crawled out of the thorns, my clothes torn and soaked with sweat. I kept low, moving from the shadow of a boarded-up popcorn stand to the rusted remains of a strength tester game. As I neared the Cursed Canyon, I saw something that made me stop dead. Pinned to a tree with a rusted nail was a piece of clothing. It was Henderson's leather jacket. It was shredded, the back torn out as if by massive talons. Below it, written in what looked like dark grease on the bark of the tree, were the words, "New rules. Don't hide. We see the light. The rooster wants to sing." My radio chirped. I didn't want to answer it, but the static was rhythmic. I pressed the receiver. Marcus. It wasn't Henderson's voice. It was a voice that sounded like a recording played at the wrong speed, a digital mimicry of human speech. Marcus. Rule number 7, look behind the log. Flume, flume. I looked. Standing on top of the highest drop of the log flume, silhouetted against the dying sun, was the cow. It was holding something in its mouth. It was a human arm, still clad in a leather sleeve. The cow tossed the arm into the stagnant green water of the flume. Then it opened its mouth and let out a sound I will never forget. It wasn't a moo. It was a recording of a child laughing, looped over and over until it became a scream. I didn't wait for the sun to go down. I ran. I sprinted past the astral spinner, the metal cars swinging in the wind like hanging cages. I could hear the clank hiss behind me gaining speed. The rooster was fast. It was closing the gap. I saw the security booth ahead, a small concrete square with a heavy steel door and a single reinforced window. I reached the door and fumbled with the keys Henderson had given me. My hands were shaking so badly I dropped the ring. The screeching of the fiddle was right behind my ear. I dived for the keys, grabbed them, and shoved the master key into the lock, just as a heavy, cold weight slammed into my shoulder. I was thrown against the door. I turned and saw the pig, its snout inches from my face, its glass eyes spinning in their sockets. It raised the fiddle bow, which I now saw was sharpened to a razor edge. I kicked out, my boot connecting with the pig's rusted chest plate. There was a hollow clang, and the machine stumbled back. I used that second to turn the key, throw the door open, and dive inside. I slammed the door shut and threw the bolt. A split second later, something massive hit the outside of the door with the force of a car crash. The steel buckled, but it held. I slumped against the wall, gasping for air. The booth was tiny, filled with old monitors and a desk covered in dust. I was safe, for now. Then I heard it. From the corner of the room, in the darkness behind the desk, a slow, rhythmic clank hiss. I turned my head. There, sitting in the corner, was a fourth animatronic I hadn't seen before. It was a dog, a mangy yellow hound with a security cap bolted to its head. Its jaw was open, and in its lap sat a small portable tape recorder. The dog didn't move, but the tape recorder clicked on. Henderson's voice filled the room. Rule number 8. Marcus, there is no security booth. There is only the kennel. Outside, the rooster began to crow. It was a mechanical, distorted shriek that tore through the night, signaling the start of the real. The dog's head didn't move, but its eyes, two small, yellowed, incandescent bulbs, flickered in sync with the tape recorder's hiss. I was backed into the corner of the small concrete room, the cold sweat on my skin turning to ice. The steel door behind me was vibrating with the rhythm of the rooster's mechanical crowing. It was a sound that shouldn't have been possible for a machine to make. It sounded like 1,000 dying birds screaming through a megaphone. I looked at the yellow hound. It was named Safety Sam, according to the faded sticker on its chest plate. Its fur was patchy, looking more like human hair than synthetic fiber, and it smelled of wet earth and copper. Rule number 9. The tape recorder clicked again. The voice definitely wasn't Henderson's anymore. It was a composite of voices, syllables stitched together from a dozen different people. If you are in the kennel, do not touch the floor. I looked down. The floor was concrete, stained with oil and decades of grime. But as I watched, the grime began to move. Dark, viscous fluid started seeping up through the cracks in the cement. It wasn't oil. It was thick, black, and pulsed like a heartbeat. I leaped onto the desk, knocking over a stack of old monitors. The black fluid flooded the floor within seconds, rising like an incoming tide. It swirled around the base of the desk, and where it touched the metal legs, it hissed. The dog, Safety Sam, didn't move. The fluid rose around it, covering its paws, its legs, up to its waist. The machine didn't corrode. It seemed to drink it in. The door behind me groaned. A massive dent appeared in the center of the steel, the shape of a bird's beak. Then another. The rooster wasn't just hitting the door, it was pecking through it. The metal tore with a screeching protest. I scrambled to look through the small reinforced window. Outside, the park had transformed. The fog was gone, replaced by a flickering strobe light effect that pulsed from the center of the park. The astral spinner was rotating at a blurred, impossible speed, but it wasn't making a sound. The cursed canyon flume was glowing with a sickly neon green light. And then there was the barnyard jubilee. They weren't just animatronics. The black fluid from the floor was everywhere outside, coating them like a second skin, filling in the gaps where their fur had rotted away. They looked sleek, biological, and terrifying. The cow was standing on its hind legs, its front hooves transformed into elongated, multi-jointed fingers. The pig was no longer playing the fiddle. It was holding the sharpened bow like a surgical instrument, staring at the booth with a singular, focused hunger. The rooster turned its head 180 degrees to look at the others. It let out another crow, and the cow and pig began to scale the sides of the security booth. I could hear their metallic claws scraping against the concrete walls. I searched the desk frantically. There had to be something here. Henderson wouldn't have sent me in here just to die, or maybe he would have. Maybe I was the high-priority debris that needed to be cleared out. My hand hit a drawer that was locked. I grabbed my crowbar and jammed it into the gap, throwing my weight against it. The wood splintered, and the drawer popped open. Inside wasn't a weapon. It was a reel-to-reel tape, labeled Blackwood Protocol 1978. Below it was a manual. I flipped it open, my eyes scanning the pages as the sound of claws reached the roof above my head. The Jubilee is not powered by electricity, the manual read in crisp typewriter font. They are vessels. The park sits on a localized thinning of the veil. The performances were never for the children. They were a containment ritual. Every song, every dance, every rule was designed to keep the hunger fed. When the park closed, the ritual stopped. The vessels are now empty. They are looking for new components. The ceiling above me buckled. A heavy, three-toed metal foot crashed through the plaster, missing my shoulder by an inch. I saw the rooster's leg. It was no longer rusted steel. It was covered in that black pulsing ichor, and where the skin was torn, I could see human teeth embedded in the joints. I realized what the kennel was. It wasn't a place of safety. It was the processing center. I looked at the reel-to-reel player on the desk. It was old, the belt frayed. I grabbed the tape from the drawer and fumbled to thread it through the spindles. My hands were shaking so violently I dropped the leader twice. Above me, the cow's elongated fingers were prying at the hole the rooster had made. The pig was at the window now, its snout pressed against the reinforced glass, its blackened eyes watching me with an intelligence that was ancient and cold. Come on, I hissed finally, catching the tape on the take-up reel. I hit play. At first, there was only static. Then, a voice began to sing. It was a woman's voice, high and melodic, singing a nursery rhyme I didn't recognize. Under the hill and over the gate, the farmer arrives when the hour is late. He brings the corn and he brings the grain, to hide the bone and hush the pain. The effect was instantaneous. The scratching on the roof stopped. The pig backed away from the window, its head tilting in confusion. The black fluid on the floor began to recede, draining back into the cracks as if terrified of the sound. But then the tape hissed. The old plastic was brittle. Snap. The music died. The silence that followed was the most terrifying thing I have ever heard. It lasted for 5 seconds. Then the rooster let out a sound that wasn't a crow or a scream. It was a sob, a deep human sob that vibrated through the very foundations of the booth. The door didn't just dent this time. It exploded inward. The rooster stood in the shattered frame. It was massive, its tuxedo rags fluttering in the wind. Its head was no longer a bird's. The mask had fallen away, revealing a twisted, elongated face made of fused plastic and bone. It reached out a hand with 5 fingers and a wedding ring fused to the metal of the ring finger. "Marcus," it whispered. The voice was Henderson's. "Rule number." I backed away, tripwiring over the desk. I fell into the corner, right next to Safety Sam. "What is Rule 10? I screamed, swinging the crowbar. The rooster stepped into the room, its presence filling the space until the air felt too thick to breathe. The cow and the pig peered in through the ruined doorway, their bodies twitching in a rhythmic, synchronized dance. The dog, Safety Sam, suddenly clicked. Its jaw dropped open, and a small hidden screen in its chest illuminated. On the screen was a single line of text, glowing in a primitive green font. Rule 10. The show must go on. The rooster grabbed me. Its grip was like a vice, the metal fingers sinking into the flesh of my arms. It didn't try to kill me. It began to pull me toward the door, toward the center of the park, toward the grand pavilion. "No, let me go." I fought, I kicked, I bit. It was like fighting a mountain. As I was dragged across the Wonderway, I saw the other attractions. The astral spinner had stopped, and the cars were open. Inside each one sat a figure, a silent, gray-skinned person, their eyes wide and glassy, their hands fused to the safety bars. They weren't dead. Their chests were moving in slow, synchronized, shallow breaths. They were part of the park now. We reached the grand pavilion. The doors were wide open and the stage was bathed in a brilliant, blinding spotlight. The barnyard jubilee took their places. The pig with its fiddle, The cow with its bonnet, which I now realized was made of human skin. The rooster dragged me onto the stage. It pushed me toward a small wooden stool in the center. Next to the stool was a costume. It was a sheep. A fluffy white sheep with a wide, smiling mask. The sheep. Henderson's voice came from the rooster's throat, but it was fading, being replaced by the screeching of the fiddle. The sheep always dies in the second act. I looked at the pig. It raised its bow. I looked at the cow. It began to sharpen its hooves. The rooster took its place at the center of the stage. It looked out at the empty theater, which was no longer empty. The seats were filled with the silent gray people from the rides. Thousands of them, staring up with unblinking eyes. The rooster raised its wings. "Welcome," it boomed. The voice now a perfect, terrifying ringmaster's roar. "To the final performance of Blackwood Land." The pig struck the first chord. It was a sound of pure agony. I looked at the sheep mask. Inside, I could see the dried blood of the person who had worn it before me. I looked at the exit. The doors were closing, the heavy chains sliding into place of their own accord. There was no way out. There was only the script. I reached for the mask. I held the sheep mask in my trembling hands. The plastic was cold, smelling of old sweat and something metallic. I looked at the rooster, whose Henderson-fused face was twitching as the music swelled. The pig's fiddle was no longer a sound of wood and string. It was the sound of a saw cutting through bone, a high-pitched vibration that made my teeth ache. I didn't put the mask on. If the manual was right, the rules were the bars of a cage. The performance was a ritual, and a ritual only works if everyone follows the script. I looked at the rooster, its massive wings half spread, its glass eyes locked on the audience of gray, unblinking people. "I'm not a sheep," I whispered. The music faltered. The pig's bow skidded across the strings with a violent screech. The rooster's head snapped toward me, the plastic skin on its neck crinkling. "The script," the rooster hissed, the voice now a distorted layer of 100 different victims. "Marcus, the audience is dead," I yelled, standing up from the stool. I gripped the crowbar, my knuckles white. "This isn't a show. It's a slaughterhouse." I dove toward the equipment rack at the side of the stage. If this place was a thinning of the veil and these things were vessels, they needed the atmosphere to survive. They needed the darkness, the copper smell, and the silence of the park. I found the main breaker panel for the pavilion. It was encased in a rusted iron box, thick with decades of cobwebs. I slammed the crowbar into the latch. "Stop him!" the rooster roared. The voice was so loud it shattered the remaining glass in the spotlight above us. The pig scrambled across the stage, its movements jerky and fast, the sharpened fiddle bow swinging in a wide arc. It sliced through my jacket, drawing a line of fire across my ribs. I screamed, but I didn't stop. I jammed the crowbar into the breaker and pulled with everything I had. The iron door groaned and flew open. Inside were rows of heavy industrial switches, many of them fused together by heat and age. I didn't know which one did what. I started flipping all of them. Suddenly, the stage lights didn't just turn off. They exploded. But the darkness didn't come. Instead, the emergency fire suppression system triggered. From the ceiling, hundreds of gallons of stagnant, chemically treated water began to pour down. It wasn't the black fluid of the floor. It was cold, harsh, and filled with chlorine. Where the water touched the animatronics, they hissed. The black ichor coating their frames began to peel away in clumps, looking like burnt paper. The cow collapsed, its legs buckling as the biological skin dissolved, revealing the rusted skeletal frame beneath. The rooster let out a cry of agony. It clawed at its face, trying to hold the Henderson mass together, but the water was washing away the glue of the ritual. "The show," it wheezed, its voice becoming thin and mechanical. "The show must. The show is cancelled," I grunted. I saw my I leaped off the stage, splashing through the rising water on the floor. The gray people in the seats didn't move. They couldn't. They were part of the furniture now, their souls woven into the fabric of the park. I couldn't save them. I could only hope to end it. I ran for the back of the theater, toward the projection booth. If the Blackwood Protocol manual was right, the entire pavilion was built over the source. I needed to break the seal. I climbed the narrow spiral staircase to the projection room. Inside, the air was dry and smelled of ozone. I saw the old film projectors, massive and silent like sleeping giants. Between them sat a single silver canister labeled, "Do not open, property of Blackwood Research." I didn't open it. I grabbed a heavy canister of film and used it to smash the window of the projection booth. I looked down at the stage. The rooster was standing in the center, the water pouring over it. It had stopped fighting. It was looking up at me. Its eyes were no longer red. They were clear glass. "Thank you," it whispered. The voice was clearly Henderson's now, just Henderson. I took my lighter from my pocket. I looked at the rolls of highly flammable nitrate film scattered across the floor. This building was a tinderbox. "Rule number 11, I said to the empty room. "Burn it all down." I flicked the lighter and dropped it into a pile of film. The fire didn't catch slowly. It roared to life in a blinding flash of orange and white. The nitrate film burned with a ferocity that turned the air to fire in seconds. I turned and sprinted down the back fire escape, the heat peeling the skin on my neck. I burst out the back door of the pavilion just as the roof collapsed. A pillar of white fire shot into the night sky, visible for miles. I didn't look back. I ran through the Wonderway, past the rusted shops and the silent carousel. I reached the perimeter gate and didn't stop. I climbed over the fence, the barbed wire tearing at my palms, and fell into the dirt on the other side. I crawled to my truck and fumbled for the spare key I kept in the wheel well. The engine turned over on the first try. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The grand pavilion was a pyre. But in the flickering light of the flames, I saw figures standing at the fence. They weren't the monsters. They were the gray people, thousands of them, standing at the edge of the park, watching the fire. They weren't trying to escape. They were just standing there, free from the script, but with nowhere left to go. I drove until the sun came up. I didn't go back to the office. I didn't call the firm. I drove until I hit the coast, sold the truck for cash, and changed my name. But sometimes when I'm in a quiet place, I hear it. A slow, rhythmic clank hiss. And every time I see a help wanted sign for a maintenance job, or a cleaning gig, or a security post, I keep walking. Because I know the truth now. The world is full of places like Blackwood Land. Places that have been forgotten, but haven't gone away. And they are always looking for a new cast. I still have the rule sheet. I keep it in my wallet. A tattered, burned piece of plastic. I don't look at it often, but I know the last rule by heart. The one that wasn't printed on the paper, but was written in the shadows of the stage. Rule number 12. If you survive the performance, don't think you're free. You're just a spectator waiting for the sequel. I work in a small grocery store now. It's quiet. It's normal. But last night, I was closing up the freezer aisle, and I saw something in the reflection of the glass. It was a tall, feathered shadow, and it was wearing a tuxedo. I didn't turn around. I just kept mopping, because I know rule number 2, and I'm never turning my